Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kirsten Oster. I am a professor in the English department here at Rice and also the director of the Medical Humanities Research Institute. I am delighted to introduce our next speaker, who you will meet initially through a film that we're going to show you. So, you're going to see the choreography of CRISPR, which is a film that was made by Gabrielle Lamb. Gabrielle is a choreographer and 2020 Guggenheim Fellow. She's based in New York City, where she directs Pigeon Wing Dance. And she is also a 2024 Hearst choreographer in residence at Princeton University. And you can read a much fuller biography in the conference program online, but I wanted to save, since it is the end of a very wonderful and full day, I wanted to save most of our time for a conversation. So we will see the short film, which is about 12 minutes long, and then Gabrielle will join me on stage for a conversation. Okay, so first of all, congratulations on that beautiful work of art. I love watching that every time. So Choreographer of CRISPR was created in 2022, and it was commissioned by the Gene Cultures exhibit at the MIT Museum. Can you tell us a bit more about how the piece came to be?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. So the MIT Museum, in the midst of the pandemic in summer 2020, had put out an open call. And my entire field had ground to a halt, so I was looking for anything at all to do. And in their open call for this opening exhibit, they stated that they welcomed submissions from any kind of artist, that we needn't be scientists, and I appreciated that a lot because otherwise I would never have dared to submit anything to the MIT Museum. And so what I submitted was a proposal to do something like this. I made a little mock-up, which, because no dance spaces were open, at that time, I choreographed on myself in my living room on a 6x8 carpet. I took the carpet up to my rooftop in New York, and I used some of these words, helix and spiral and slice and guide, and I used the super titles because I like to do text animation. So it was a small 2.5-minute thing that I submitted to them, and I think they were just dumbfounded that anyone in dance, that dance could refer to anything except itself, I guess. And so they invited me to make the full project.
That's great. So can you tell us a little bit about how you prepared to choreograph the dance? Did you do research on CRISPR and on the various processes that are named in the dance, like folding and splicing, or did you do research on film or on science? What was the process?
So I started with the documentary Human Nature, which has been mentioned earlier today. It was a good intro to the discussion about CRISPR and about what it does. And then from there, I just branched out, looking at things that the people mentioned in the film had done or said in the past, Jennifer Doudna, Kevin Esfelt, people like that, other things they had written, interviews that they had done, and it sort of led me on a whole research trail, and I had quite a long time to think about what I would do. It was over a year probably before we even had to start choreographing it. So the research process was super long enough for me to worry a lot about whether I was smart enough to do it or what I would do. And I think I did so much reading about this, and yet I felt like I hadn't done enough, and like maybe I should do CRISPR, but I didn't really know what that would entail, and that was, and one thing I realized is that CRISPR is talked about a lot in word processing terms, but there isn't a whole lot of visual representation of it, and so I thought there was space for something like that. It's obviously not a precise account of what CRISPR does, and at one point before making the project, I was talking to a friend who used to work at MIT who loves dance, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, and he said, well, what you're going to do is you're going to have someone say step by step what CRISPR does, and then you're going to illustrate exactly that in dance. And I thought, no, I'm not going to. No. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do that.
I'm glad that you didn't do that.
Right, because I knew enough to know that I was there as an artist, not as a scientist, and I was glad when I saw the exhibit because there's so much dense information that does say exactly what CRISPR does. And by the time people get to this, they just need to sit down and absorb and process in a different way.
Yes, so, and we're going to get to the place of art and creativity and imagination in the practice of science, but I want to ask you just a little bit more about the process of creating, so how you move from researching to creating, also how the music came about, and what was the process of choreography like?
So for the music, that collaboration came first, and I worked with James Budenich, a collaborator of mine who at the time was a doctoral student at Duke. And he was very helpful to me at all steps in the process to remind me that we're here as artists and that we can make artistic choices, that we don't have to be literal. And I had him try some, translating strands of DNA into music, and he said, well, it just didn't sound very good. So I thought, I'm here to make something that looks good and sounds good and is inspired by CRISPR, that you can't translate literally, and why would you want to? And he helped with the structure as well, so that I had the music when I got in the studio with the dancers, and the process with them is very collaborative, improvisational. I gave them a lot of those word prompts as improv, and just to see which ones suit which dancers, so for example, I knew that I wanted to work with spirals, because I've always loved spirals, and that was one of the things that attracted me to DNA and CRISPR in particular. And so in developing a spiraling movement with the arms, I developed this arm improv that had 3 rules, and you can do it with a water bottle, which is ubiquitous in dance studios. And so the rules were that the water bottle has to stay vertical, and that it has to spiral. I'll have to stand away from the microphone, in one continuous direction. And you have to look elegant while doing it too. That's the 3rd rule. And move through levels and do something nice with your feet. And that was the origin of the strands, the basic arm movement that is done in the beginning. And then in combining multiple bodies, I just explored different combinations of, well, what if you wrap, and what if your job is to slice? And no, that didn't really work, but let's try this. And always guided by what is interesting, what appeals to my desire to see something that appears natural and organic, but is also surprising. And one of the only case where I was able to be literal, it's a little hard to understand, I'll try. Actually, maybe, Kevin, if we could look at that little 30-second portion of the film in just a moment. So I developed a sequence, an actual literal translation of a DNA sequence. And I said, okay, G is you offer your elbow, and it has to be met by the hand, which is C. A is you offer your finger, it has to be met by the head, which is T. And so if you can roll the 30 seconds, they're coming in. So we go through this whole strand, and I used a DNA sequence that had actually been worked with by some scientists using CRISPR, and it was the DNA sequence that determines the direction that a snail shell coils, and they reversed that direction in keeping with the spiral theme. And one of the things that's interesting about this is it's super hard for the dancers to remember, because it's rote memorization. There is no physical logic to it. And these people are extremely skilled with their bodies, but they could not remember whether to point their finger or offer their elbow, because it accesses a different kind of memory.
That's great, thank you. So I think we can move now into we have a sense of how this film came about and the work that you did to create it. But we talked about how so much of creativity operates at the level of imagination. And many scientists have remarked on the role of creative works, literary science fiction, motion picture films, and other kinds of artworks. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's art throughout this entire conference. It's another way of knowing, another way of discovery, another way of seeing the world and experiencing things differently. And so I wanted to ask you, to kind of think a little more abstractly now about, and talk about how you think about the relationship between what we might call scientific representation and what we might call artistic representation.
I think that referencing Shannon's presentation earlier today, I think dance represents here the ineffable. It is, it's hard to translate anything directly into dance. Stories are hard to tell with dance. So we're offering a more embodied perspective. We're offering a different way of thinking from one of those wild places that Dr. Arnold was talking about. We think in different ways. I have to move in order to explain what I'm doing. It's very hard to just sit here and describe a movement. I have to do it, and then I can say, oh, I'm doing this with my right hand, and then I'm sending a ripple through the left, and then I'm grasping. So I think that, and in the process of creating something, I need to be able to touch things and move things around. I have this whole thing that I do with Post-it notes, creating timelines with Post-it notes. And so I think it offers a physical perspective that sometimes gets left behind when there's so many words and so much dense information. I think, I don't know if that answers it very well. But it's also it's not scalable. It's, the composers that I work with are shocked and scandalized by the amount of time that we spend with dancers in the studio, because they usually compose with computer programs. So when I say I need 3 hours in the studio for every choreographed minute, people's time is expensive. Large spaces with sprung floors are expensive. And I spent way more than 3 hours per minute here because it was a pandemic and everyone had some extra time. So I think they're scandalized by that, but also a little bit envious, because you get to collaborate with people, and and every body is different. You can't translate choreography easily from one body to another. I'm remounting this work to do live at the MIT Museum. It's March 16th, if you happen to be in the neighborhood, and I'm replacing a dancer and finding that I have to almost re-choreograph everything because it doesn't fit him. It doesn't flow. What the guy in orange did, it doesn't fit this new guy. And so I think it's an antidote to some of the other ways of thinking that we have, that everything should be faster and more and scalable. It is ineffable, and it's a labor of love. No one is in it for the profit.
I think there's also something in there about embodiment and embodied ways of knowing, which your example just now really speaks to, that you can't just replace one person with the other and get the same result. And I think it's an interesting reminder in the context of this discussion, because we've heard a lot about a lot of different practices of science today, but we haven't heard that much about like how people are actually physically kind of doing the work, like where they are, what the space is like, what their movements are like, how that relates to the ways that they think and they process information and they learn from that. So I think we get a really nice counterpoint with this work to provoke us to think about some of the other dimensions and some of the sensorial dimensions of the creation of knowledge. I think can we go 5 more minutes? Okay, so I think we can open it up for a couple of questions from the audience, if you don't mind using the mic.
So that was fantastic, and I think it's very interesting. We were talking this morning about Asilomar, this meeting that took place in 1975, and a week before that event, Paul Berg, who was one of the main organizers, organized a kind of very 1970s amateur version and literal account of protein synthesis on a football field in Stanford. I don't know if you've seen this astonishing video on YouTube. but I think there's a lot of resonance between the artistry and the perfection that you've provided and the rather ramshackle and much more literal explanation of what protein synthesis does, and your decision not to go down that route was very appropriate, I think.
Thank you. Yes, I did not know about this film until Luis made me aware of it, and I watched it, and I had the same feeling as you. I found it delightful, and I think that Paul Berg and his students did what they should have done.
Yeah. If anybody wants to watch it, you go to YouTube, put in Paul Berg protein synthesis, and you'll find it, and it's a blast.
It's also it's very much of the moment in with the kind of counterculture vibe and everything. It's very fun in that way. Please.
Much for your work. I really loved it. And I'm an anthropologist that spent 2 years in a CRISPR lab. And biologists communicate a lot with each other through diagrams. And I spent a lot of time with diagrams also just to gain a sense of what CRISPR was. And I wondered if they were useful for your process as well. Your dance really communicated some aspect of the diagrammatic to me.
Definitely, yes, but not literally. I think it was more like when things appeared through dancers' bodies, through the process of improv, I would say, yes, let's keep that in, because that reminds me of this shape that I saw, and maybe we can increase the angle a little bit more so it will fit better. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious if you'd speak a little bit about the various ways that you've valued and that the dancers involved have valued and that the sponsors or other people who've maybe commented on the dance have valued this work. I'm thinking about how it might be interpreted as a science communication tool to explain, but it might also be a lot more than that to other people.
For me, and the dancers knew way less than I knew about CRISPR, so it was a huge education for them. It was an education for me as well, and I certainly made a dance piece that doesn't resemble other things that I've made, and maybe has changed the course of other things I've chosen to do since then. And I get interesting messages from people who see the work in the museum. It's there in the galleries through this fall. It will have been there for 2 years. And so sometimes out of the blue, someone will write me a message. The curators told me that at the community day for the students before the museum opened, that there was a group of them standing in front of the screen and dancing along with it. And I think that for the curators was gold. And I think probably the most interesting message I've gotten was a request from someone, I think it was an MIT grad working in biotech, he asked if he and his wife could buy a copy of the film to show to their daughter in 10 years because she'd just been born a few weeks ago. And they wanted her to see it, and they were afraid that, it wouldn't be in the galleries anymore.
Wow.
About the music. Did the music, was that an inspiration from the dance, or did it inspire the dance, or how did you choose the music for it?
The music I commissioned from my collaborator, James Budenich, and so the music came first. We had a lot of discussions, shared a lot of information back and forth, tried to decide what was important. It did inspire the dance, certainly. The structure of it did, and we discussed that a lot. It was also loosely inspired by CRISPR. For example, the first section with the strands, the woman's solo, he made out of 4 chords representing the 4 bases, and then at the end, it's the same 4 chords in reverse, played by the guitar, and that's sort of a little nod to the palindromic repeats. So little things like that that maybe the audience doesn't need to know, but were helpful to us in our process of making something unlike other things that we make.
Thank you.
This next question is more about, because what we were shown was really a piece of film, not dance. And it becomes quite obvious when we have the animation and the editing elements. So I was wondering, what was your approach to choosing showing the words or not, or allowing, imagination to take hold, or guiding the viewer by showing those words, and especially when we see the copies of the dancers and so on, and using that technique to further reinforce a message. Like, what was your thought process for making those choices?
I kind of went with my intuition, watching it and editing it. Well, it's been a while since I offered any information. I feel like someone might be getting antsy at this point to know what's going on. So I would offer something at that point. And, where it appears on the screen and how it moves very much is choreographed with the dancer's movement. Not planned at all. That's something that came later. The dance came first, and then the interactions with text came later. As far as the copying sequence, which is a little bit different from the rest of it, where there's like multiple iterations of the dancers, to be honest, I found it boring to watch the wide shot there, and I got antsy watching it, and I thought there needs to be something more happening, and so I just played with it until I felt like it was dynamic enough and made sense as art.
As a follow-up, also the camera movements are quite deliberate, but I wonder I even wondered how much of it was actually camera movement during the filming process, and some of it even being animating the camera in post.
I didn't much animate the camera in post. No, rarely. It was more on a gimbal in production with my cinematographer, Joe Raffanti, and we had a rehearsal day. This was shot on a theater stage, on a dance stage, because it was made for a sprung marley floor, so we needed a specific kind of space. So we had a day of rehearsal there and shot a bunch of stuff, and I decided, yes, I like this, let's go more in that direction. So we knew what we were really going for when we had our full shoot. Yeah.
It's quite effective, so yeah, thanks for that.
I think this is, as a potential example of science communication too, it'll be intriguing to think about this in relation to the biofilm shorts, which will be screened tomorrow night as well as the film tonight. So it's a great way of expanding what we think about what people need to know about science in a way. This gives us a different way of thinking that is much less literal, as you said, and I think in that way very provocative and as well as beautiful. So please join me in thanking Gabrielle. Thank you.
All right, what a full day. I am familiar with thinking about the scientists that I study and all of us as existing in time, but as I lose myself in the sheafs of paper in the archive, and perhaps you feel the same way in your own fields, I sometimes forget the embodied nature of knowledge. And so Gabrielle has just so beautifully connected us again with the fundamental mode of our existence as bodies in space. So we will turn now to another fundamental mode of existence. As the great philosopher of science and mathematician Henri Poincaré had once noted, science has marvelous applications, but a science in which applications were the only aim would no longer be science, but only a kitchen. I don't know what Poincaré has against kitchens. They produce some wonderful accompaniment to all the food for thought that we've been having today. And so, with apologies to Shakespeare, for those of you who know this line, "Oh, brave new world that has such hors d'oeuvres in it." We have been collaborating with Rice Dining. We have 5 teams of executive chefs who have concocted some remarkable things for us tonight in the Brockstein Pavilion, the same place where we had lunch, where you can also imbibe the spirit of Asilomar in a mocktail of your choice. Please enjoy the evening. I'll see some of you later for the film and tomorrow.